In January 2009, a large natural gas deposit was discovered in the highly underexplored area of the Levantine Basin of the Mediterranean Sea. Named the Tamar Field, the well consisted of multiple high-quality reservoirs, and it was the largest conventional natural gas discovery in the world in 2009. In 2010, a year after the discovery of Tamar, the world's largest deepwater natural gas deposit was discovered at the Leviathan field in the same geologic basin. Sensing that major hydrocarbon discoveries were being confirmed that had the potential to change the geopolitics of the entire region, the United States Geologic Survey launched its first ever estimate of the total oil and natural gas resources in a broad region that encompassed the eastern Mediterranean, including the Aegean basin. Their conclusion was impressive, to put it mildly, wrote William Engdahl in early 2012. Suddenly, this highly strategic and geopolitically sensitive area of the world was facing new challenges and the potential for conflict. The Aegean, with its long history of conflict between the states of Greece and Turkey, became a renewed source of tension between the two countries, with the hydrocarbon resources moving to center stage and casting its shadow over the bordering region of the eastern Mediterranean. Borders are predominantly understood as defining lines of territory, and they are very much associated with political structures, spaces and powers, and shaped by societal, historic, and physical geographic factors. This is especially true at the international level, where borders are associated with states and state power, authority, and national identity, which in turn point inter alia to legal, fiscal, and sociocultural factors. They are thus more about laying out sovereignty and staking the claim to the territorial reach, separating, distinguishing, and keeping apart the spaces of competing claims. They are inherently contradictory, both separating and bringing in touch neighboring governments and their territories. But there can be little doubt that early 21st century is a transitional period of significant change in the form of governing arrangements. Many of the foundations of the Westphalian paradigm of the nation-state, the traditionally accepted form of the modern international system, are being challenged by recent economic, technological, and cultural developments. These elements, either alone or together, have combined to create the perception that the capacities of national governments are diminishing, whether it's in the form of emerging transnational regulatory regimes, increased global flows of capital, or intensified social interaction on a significant scale. In a world of increasing globalization, these developments are challenging the once exclusive Westphalian model of sovereignty and its accompanying concepts of territory, boundaries, and borders. What was once the domain of authority exclusive to states is now being shared with other loci or sources of authority. While the national state remains the only class of entity which possesses the acknowledged legitimate ability to project power and authority, these projections of power are, however, moderated by the virtual and ethereal influences of individual or combined institutional dynamics. The institutional non-state actors have introduced new sets of relationships and power dynamics to the regions in which they operate, and the familiar traditional category of actors, the Westphalian paradigm of the traditional sovereign state, while still important, is finding its sovereignty increasingly perforated by this new complexity. The current territorial claims of sovereignty in the Aegean Sea are based on the contemporary law of the sea. Traditionally, state jurisdiction in the marine environment rarely extended more than 3 miles offshore, and as a result, the delimitation of maritime boundaries between states was only rarely a controversial process. The 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as UNCLOS III, however, with its novel concept of the exclusive economic zone, expanded the extent of a state's territory up to a limit of 200 miles, opening the door for multiple cases of conflicting claims. The Aegean Sea, as a mercurial and amorphic region of great intensities, conflict, energy, and tension for millennia, was no exception. It is a classic archetype of the tactical and strategic interplay of sovereign border control between the two states that share its shores, Greece and Turkey. As the heirs of their ancient antagonisms and the dispute in the Aegean region rooted in their common histories, the new international parameters regarding the sea have exacerbated the long-standing geopolitical sensitivity between the two states. From an historical point of view, however, the geographic space of the Aegean is a cumulative construction assembled over centuries of interactions and events. This construction has played a significant role in the histories of both states and is perceived to have a role in their economic and political futures. Although sovereignty over the area ultimately lies with the states themselves within today's global governance structures, the Aegean arena can be seen as consisting of nested regions constructed by the multitude of non-state actors that proliferate in the 21st century. These collectives, or even individuals, exercise influence over the area and often through their suasion with the national states can affect actions and activities through policy-making processes. This circumstance challenges the concepts and guidelines laid out in the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention and its ability to mitigate and/or contribute to the resolution of maritime delimitation issues. Not only is the Convention unable to consider the unique historical or cultural geography of any dispute which it attempts to resolve, but it is unable to consider the plethora of non-state actors who now predominate on the world stage, who are not bound by international law or regulatory authorities. Given this foundation, this research project contends that the UNCLOS III agreement is insufficient by itself to contribute to the efficient and equitable exploitation of the hydrocarbon resources projected to exist in the Aegean Sea. As neither hard or soft law, this is a fundamental issue that sets up failure of the application of what has become accepted international law and creates a situation where sheer power in some form, whether it be geopolitical, military, diplomatic, economic, financial, cultural, ideological, or technological, will ultimately resolve the issue. By viewing the Aegean Sea as a series of socially constructed spaces, this project has a major contribution to make in the contemporary understanding of the geopolitical mechanisms, dynamics, and circumstances of interstate, institutional, and international relations that operate in this area of the world that should be considered in the understanding or resolution of maritime disputes. There are no simple, clear solutions in every circumstance. While both states are anxious to exploit the area's hydrocarbon reserves, there are, however, multiple other entities that cannot be ignored that are competing for control over those same resources. As to be expected, there are multiple conflicting users of ocean space, socially constructed spaces which serve a particular function. In general, these socially constructed spaces can be broken down into three main categories, which include resource spaces, national spaces, and institutional spaces. For much of history, the seas have been portrayed either as the backdrop to the stage where the real action is taking place, or they were portrayed as the means of connection between activities taking place on the coasts and their continental interiors. The characteristics of the sea itself, the nature of human interactions with it, and the contexts that were cemented or cast aside has largely been absent from history. Attention to the seas as global transnational spaces has been diminished. And yet the recognition that the seas and oceans should be studied as a space of society is not new. Almost 2,000 years ago, the Greek geographer Strabon wrote, "We are in a certain sense amphibious, not exclusively connected with the land, but with the sea as well. The sea and the land in which we dwell furnish theaters for actions, limited for limited actions, and vast for grander deeds. We commit a deplorable hiatus," according to early 20th century geographer Ellen Churchill Semple, "when we fail to make a definitive study of the oceans over which man explores and colonizes and trades, as well as the land on which he plants and builds and sleeps. The world's oceans and the seas are, therefore, not a formless void between societies, but rather a unique and specifically constructed space within society. This is particularly evident when we examine the seas from a geopolitical power point of view. Control of specific locations on the Earth's surface is considered crucial for global power, and certain geopolitical theorists have put a premium on control of portions or the entirety of the world ocean. rather than being a neutral surface across which and within which states and/or empires have vied for power. It is a place that shapes and is shaped by social and political processes, and a space where the social contest is being played out. Natural resources have become the new powerful key to defining geopolitics and securing economic and strategic interests. Historically long linked with prolonged conflicts and wars, they are today increasingly reshaping the global political landscape, influencing foreign policies, and boosting economic growth around the world. But how do we define a resource? A resource is something for which society has a need and that is accessible. In other words, whether something is a resource or not depends on whether there is something to be gained from it at a specific point in time. Resources have three main characteristics: utility, usually limited availability, and the potential for depletion or consumption. They can and are categorized in a variety of ways: renewable, non-renewable, actual, potential, ubiquitous, local, biotic, abiotic, as well as on the basis of ownership: individual, community, national, or international. But resources, particularly natural resources, do have one characteristic that is noteworthy when considering their space. They pay no attention to borders. They move freely within and without of socially constructed spaces, and their power lies in the fact that the need for these resources drives human and governmental actions in the socially constructed spaces. The sense of national space is an intangible, commonly held interrelationship, a blood bond between members of some self-defined group. This blood relationship may be actual, but more often it derives from myth based on shared pain, struggles, memories, legends, and common goals, a shared common heritage. This heritage, particularly the cultural artifacts and sometimes the institutional structures of socialized, ideological, and technological subsystems of society, creates a representation of patrimony of the nation and is often invested with considerable sentimental value to the extent that attacks on it are responded to with profound emotion. The idea of national affiliation is a deep-rooted, often non-rational one in the human psyche, and the members of a nation suffer a very visceral response to any threat against this space, real or perceived. In recent years, there's been a dramatic increase in the numbers and powers of a class of non-state actors that, in the past, has played a limited role. Many of these entities are private and whose identity is not that of national governments. These institutions feature the ability to privatize what has, in the past, been public, as well as the denationalization of what were once exclusively national capacities and policy agendas. The national state has had to reconfigure certain components of its structure and behavior to accommodate this development, allowing for a new normality, which up until now has been the exclusive raison d'etat of national governments and their agendas. This world of private power has installed itself within the public realm, contributing to this denationalization process. This new class of global agents can be defined as non-sovereign entities that exert significant economic, political, and/or social power and influence at a national and, in some cases, international level, and includes all entities that are different from states. Their participation in world politics has generally been regarded with suspicion by states that fear influence and interference with their own interests and creates uncertainty in the international arena. Given the dynamic interplay of the resource, national, and institutional spaces of the Aegean, the framework for reference for cooperation and conflict resolution is complex and relevant to the concerns of current and emerging hydrocarbon exploitation procedures. How will the Aegean Sea hydrocarbon dilemma be solved? Very simply, by power. Writing in 1957, political scientist Robert Dahl observed that where there is politics, there is power. It isn't a surprise, then, that the concept of power is fundamental to the study of world politics. But what is power? While most people have an intuitive notion of what it is, Scientists, on the other hand, have not yet formulated a concept of power that is rigorous enough to be used in the systematic study of this important social phenomenon. We can look to an endless parade of names from Plato and Aristotle to Machiavelli and Hobbes and Weber to demonstrate that there are a large number of social theorists who have devoted a great deal of attention to power and the phenomenon associated with it, as we can look everywhere to find the word and its synonyms embedded in the languages of civilization, although in subtly different ways. Power, influence, control, imperium, pouvoir, Macht, Herrschaft, Autoritas, and the list goes on. The ability to produce an outcome, power comes in many flavors, many forms. Although the maritime environment has the property of uniform abstract space as a container, it is transformed from space to place in the maritime realm. This transformation of space into place is found in the concrete realities of objects, their factual existence testifying to as the symbols of the established power as a specific place along the timeline of human history. This history is celebrated in art and literature, as well as in the architectural remnants that dot the mainland coasts and islands of the Aegean, and the seafloor itself is strewn with the silent and unmemorialized evidence of the transitive nature of the commerce, trade, power, and influence that have transected the surface of Aegean waters throughout history. The Aegean space is indeed a space of powers that have come and gone, the irreducible spatial dimension of the human social experience. There is no simple, clear solution to the hydrocarbon dilemma in the Aegean arena. But as it has been throughout history, sheer power in some form or combination will ultimately resolve the issue, with the socially constructed regions acting as an expression of and placing limitations on the exertion of power by any actor in the Aegean Sea.